And seeing these challenges, what are the opportunities in this area?
There's tremendous opportunity in fire safety in particular. There's so many different ways of adding IoT fire safety outcomes into new buildings or over existing buildings to provide safer and better outcomes for the occupants. And whether they're new technology or the use of data diagnostics, I actually think they're endless. I really encourage a lot of people too, especially if you're already in the fire protection safety industry, you should be thinking about how this can change the world, change communities. Not all of it will, but what can you be doing to create a better outcome? And a building or a community that has implemented some of these features is always a safer community than one that doesn't.
Welcome to the Smart Cities Council podcast and its special series with our global thought leaders. Smart Cities Council's global thought leadership team is an exclusive group of subject matter experts driving policy and standards, setting industry trends, conducting research, and building and sharing knowledge to advance our mission. My name is Fanny Melles. I am the global thought leader for youth engagement at the Smart Cities Council, and today I welcome Nathan Brown to the podcast, who is the global thought leader for fire safety. Nathan Brown is a founding partner and managing director at BCA Engineers, a privately held national engineering company which provides advisory and professional consulting engineering to the building construction industry. Since completing his mechanical engineering degree at the University of South Australia in 1995, Nathan has practiced as a fire protection, fire safety, and IoT engineer within the United Kingdom and Australia for a wide variety of engineering firms, including multinationals. Nathan has specific building construction and IoT knowledge, including the development of specialist fire and life safety solutions using IoT systems. In 2008, Nathan founded BCA Engineers, a national engineering business operating in the building construction industry. In 2017, Nathan invented and founded FireM, a cloud-based data collection and monitoring platform that can be used across different manufacturers' fire detection systems for portfolio and maintenance management. In 2021, Nathan spearheaded a new electronics division of BCA Engineers into fire safety IoT and has since opened offices in Southeast Asia and the USA. In 2024, Nathan co-founded Fire IT, aimed at developing software systems and solutions in the built environment. Nathan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Fanny. Glad to be here.
Let's start with an easy question, hopefully. What does fire safety mean for smart cities?
Okay, fire safety in smart cities to me means new technology and also data collection. And the use of these new technology and data enables safer communities, reduces maintenance, and also greatly impacts the response time of first responders, such as the fire authorities.
Okay, then let's unpack a bit this whole question because it was a big question. Let's start with the city. What does the city mean to you from a fire safety perspective?
The city is a space where you have a number of occupants living and working that work in different structures or commute using different transport means, and there's an expectation that those citizens are safe and provided information and responses in emergencies.
I understand that you approach this from a fire aspect, so it's interesting to hear that information regarding emergency, information safety regarding emergency. It's a refreshing view on how concentrated you are on the message itself. What does this safety mean? Because we can talk about cybersecurity, cyber safety, we can talk about physical safety, we can talk about safety of individuals, we can talk about safety of communities. And on the other hand, we can also see that if we only put safety in the forefront, then we can create nightmarish scenarios in the design of cities. For example, as an architect, I can say that if we would only focus on safety, then we would put everybody underground behind bars and making sure that there is no problems. The cars can run over anybody. So I would love to understand, what do you mean by this safety? How we can create this safety in cities?
With safety, I really refer to community engagement and to provide safer outcomes. And new technology and data now allows us to provide that. And as an example, and there's many examples here of how new technology and data can provide safer outcomes for communities and citizens. The ghetto, the shanty town, where you've got a high density of people who are severely economically and socially disadvantaged, they are not provided in accommodation which complies or meets fire safety regulations that we would expect in the Western world, as an example. And there are even situations where these communities exist in developed countries. A fire that can outbreak in a ghetto, as an example, could be quite severe. There's no impact, so there's no means to the fire brigade or fire responders to even get in to attend to the fire, because often it's all completely built out. The fire spreads and develops quite quickly, and it could really impact a number of occupants. So we now have technology such as LoRa to satellite communication, which is very inexpensive battery-powered data collectors, which could actually pinpoint the location of these fires. But not only that, then this is relatively inexpensive cost, but you could then use that to provide response for those people within that community. For example, within the fire outbreaking, someone may actually have access to a mobile phone. That would then allow them to be notified that a fire in one of their neighbours or in close proximity to where they're actually living has occurred, and that allows the community in that location to respond and potentially deal with a fire and potentially save lives. We've never had this opportunity before to even look at something like this, and this is just one example of how community safety can be significantly increased. Not only that, then in terms of the fire response, they could also be provided that information to first responders so that they actually know where the location of the fire is. So there's a lot of benefits for new technology, IoT, and we can talk later about some of the reasons why it's hard for adoption of some of this and integration. Another example I would talk about would possibly be in more of a building type or a compound. Maybe you've got a number of high-rise accommodation and you have, again, probably a lot of people from different nationalities, ethnicities, and so on. And the density of living is such that fire safety and an outbreak of fire would have a significant impact to those occupants. We know that in the developed world that we have already fire systems. So we already have detection systems and fire sprinkler systems, fire compartmentation and so on. We have all these different levels of fire protection. But what we don't have, and what IoT provides and smart cities provide, is providing data that can assist in this community response. Even in those situations, you might be an occupant on the sixth floor of a 25-story building. There's potentially an opportunity to just transmit the location of the alarm of that particular occupancy to the people on the rest of the occupancies on that floor, and then they could respond as a good neighbour, as a community, and knock on the door or whatever else in trying to understand if there's an issue, and actually intervening and being proactive rather than relying on the fire brigade to attend. And we know that in especially accommodation buildings that occupants do not tend to move even on an alarm. They will respond quickly though if there are other people alerting them to what's happening and directing them to evacuate. So we can't really underestimate the value of new technology and data being implemented into smart cities. And right now this has not been done, and it's something that I feel quite passionate about. So that's one of the main outcomes that we can have from a smart community, or a smart city, using fire safety. Another one is maintenance. There's a lot of time wasted. Let's not say wasted, but fire systems, especially in developed countries, are highly regulated. They need regular maintenance. And often this maintenance is quite mundane and ultimately overbearing, especially in communities where there is limited resource to undertake these activities or where the cost of labour is extremely high. I give an example in Singapore. It's a tiny island, it's a city-state, and they have an ageing demographic. They have limited space, even accommodating new workers and so on. So they have a mandate by the government to actually reduce, or what can they implement in terms of new technology in creating smart cities to reduce maintenance activities. And a lot of that is to do with monitoring and so on. So that's actually looking at the environmental conditions of those fire systems, whatever they may be. This is over and above traditional fire safety standards, which generally require manual inspection and testing and so on. So there's already a change in some governments and communities to embrace this smart fire safety city approach, and that is actually looking at reducing maintenance through new technology and data. The third that I'd like to talk about is the impact that this sort of a smart city for fire safety would have on the fire response or any emergency response. And as an example, in the developed world right now, in pretty well every single building that has to be connected to the fire brigade. So when there's a fire alarm in a high-risk building, which would be deemed as a high-rise residential, a hospital, a train station, or a high-rise office building, etc., these buildings are all connected automatically to raise an alarm to the fire authority. Something like 95% of all fire alarms, automatic fire alarms, are false alarms. Okay, so 95% of every time you see a fire brigade sirens flashing and so on, they are not attending a real fire. They're actually just going to a false alarm. Okay. Unfortunately, the way the standards and it's all regulated at the moment is that they have to respond to any alarm, and there's no reinforcement of what those alarms actually are, other than, hey, I've got a building fire, this is where the building is, please turn up. That's a limit of where we are right now. But with new technology and data aggregation, you can actually start to provide a bit more information. So what it may look like is this is the building on fire, this is the particular room on fire, this is where you access the building, this is where the water supplies are, etc. So the fire brigade on dispatch would be given all of this information, okay, so they know where the fire alarm source is and so on. The next level of response would be to then reinforce that data. But now we could actually be taking other information such as temperature sensors in the building, just as an example, which have nothing to do with the fire system, they're used for air conditioning. But if those temperature sensors were, say, increasing in temperature, that alone could be used to positively reinforce that there is an incident happening in that building. And if the fire brigade were to get that reinforcement, then they may actually choose to send additional response vehicles, or it could be the other way around, where they may choose to say it's probably a false alarm. We'll just send a small vehicle, not 2 fire engines. The fire brigades in a lot of jurisdictions are not for fighting the fire, they're there for rescue as well. So a lot of the time they actually are spending their time and resources attending car accidents and controlling major incidents, where there may be hazardous spills and so on. Realistically, we want to be reducing the amount of false alarm call-outs to the fire brigade and reinforcing what they're actually turning up to. And right now, we actually have all the information available. We just have not connected the dots, okay? And that there alone sums up my 3 major points to some of the aspects of how a smart fire safety would be implemented to a smart city. So that's community engagement, maintenance, reduction, and first responder response.
I really appreciate that you are not just talking about reacting to the fire, but also proactively thinking through the maintenance, checking the systems, whether they are working, whether they are properly working. And that's really reassuring that you are also talking about this proactive aspect. And it comes clear that you are very passionate about this field. What has been your journey towards fire safety? Why are you working with fire safety?
Yeah, it's probably a fairly long answer. I studied mechanical engineering at university and finished that in 1994. That shows my age a bit. But I ended up getting into building services. So that was traditionally looking in air conditioning and fire safety and electrical systems and so on that are designed into buildings. I just finished university and started my career in my first job. Then I said to my boss, do I get a computer or something to work on? And he said, no, engineers don't have computers. And he said, you get a notebook and a piece and a pen. And boy, he was so wrong, because within a couple of years, everyone had a computer. So by the time in 1998, everyone had a computer by then. But it was really in that first company that I worked, and that was Bestec in Adelaide, South Australia, that I started to gain an interest in fire safety. And fire safety wasn't really a huge profession at the time. There was no special discipline or thought given to the application of performance-based building codes or changing or doing bespoke fire engineering analysis. And in 1996, that's when in Australia they brought out the performance-based building code, which then allowed fire safety engineering to be undertaken as long as it was conducted in a certain manner and you had the necessary skills and qualifications. That obviously took a long time to actually get traction in Australia. But by around the early 2000s, that's when fire safety engineering really became quite a huge industry in its own right and profession. So I was lucky enough to be at the forefront of all of this. And because of that, and I was very interested and passionate about it, I ended up then building my career around fire safety. And in 2008, I decided to set up my own firm, BCA Engineers, and that's when I then started to build my team, build my business. And I guess it was through continuing to work as a professional fire safety engineer that I started to understand that there were opportunities, issues that could be solved through emerging technology and data. And I probably first started thinking of all of this maybe in somewhere around 2012, quite a long time ago now, where I was really looking at trying to reduce those things I was talking about, maintenance, and reinforce fire events and so on. Out of that, and because of some of the issues we were having with contractors who were actually working on fire panels and so on, I wanted to have some more sort of probity in what they were actually working on and what the issues were with the fire systems. That's when I really created FireM, to start looking at what data was being produced in the fire panels, what the issues were, and starting to analyse it. So that was my start and journey into the digitalisation of fire safety. And then really from there, then I've now advanced that to now include portable fire extinguishers, fire door monitoring and so on, which are all systems that aren't digitised yet but need to be digitised at some point, which will all then feed into data collection and aggregation for the greater good of fire safety. So that's probably how I ended up in where I am, and that's why I guess I still practice heavily in fire safety engineering and still a mentor to a lot of my junior engineers. I definitely have this other direction now where I'm leading the way in digitising fire safety.
And it's so good that you are doing it, because fire is very scary, to be honest. Your experience throughout this whole time, what are the biggest challenges in fire safety for smart cities?
I would say right now the biggest challenge is the pushback from the traditional fire safety community. So the pushback could be fire contractors. Fire contractors are very reluctant to embrace new technology or to get involved in some of this because it's very much cost driven for them. And also the fact that it's so heavily regulated. So one of the things I experience all the time is the saying, oh, does it comply? And that's what you hear a lot of. Does it comply? What does it comply with? Et cetera, et cetera. What I've been talking about, I'm not messing around with the systems as such. I'm actually adding a layer of additional measures based on the information at hand from data collection and new technology for IoT systems. And that's still very difficult. There is still an expectation. If you're labeling something fire, it has to be heavily scrutinized and have high reliability, etc. Now, we have a real lack of, in the world, any regulation concerning the emerging IoT. And in actual fact, I remember when I was in Korea talking to Chief Fire Officer from Busan Fire Brigade, he mention straight away, oh, these are just IoT systems. So he didn't label that as fire safety, he labelled it as an IoT system. Whereas I was coming at from a different tack saying, no, these are fire safety systems. They just haven't been put into the same regulation basket or controlled as traditional fire systems yet, because we're right at the front of this. So there's a real need to create standards and control over what types of data, how it can be used, and for whose benefit and control, because some of the stuff that we're talking about could be used negatively. As an example, if you're a building owner and you're trying to cover up that the fire safety of your building's not been done correctly, well, you're probably not going to like having your data being available to the fire authority. So for those people wanting to do the wrong thing, they're going to have some pushback. But yeah, so I'm just going to go back to saying that there definitely is the need for regulation and control, and the expectation that if it is called a fire system, then what does it comply to, and so on. So that's probably the main obstacle. One of the other obstacles I'm faced with, and it's interesting, it actually comes from even within my own industry and within my own company, is there's a complete and utter lack of understanding of smart cities and data sharing, data silos, data warehousing, and how that can be used for creating better outcomes. I'm still advocating for every structure or community to have an open data store, which would have non-classified sensors and data put into that store, which could be used for the whole community, no matter who you are in that community. So if you're a fire contractor, you would access the data for your maintenance. If you're the fire brigade, you'd be using that data for your response, and so on. But to have a data store and for a building and so on, you'd need to have control over the data format, the protocol, how it's transmitted, and we'd need some sort of regulation concerning that.
And seeing these challenges, what are the opportunities in this area?
There's tremendous opportunity in fire safety in particular. There's so many different ways of adding IoT fire safety outcomes into new buildings or over existing buildings to provide safer and better outcomes for the occupants. And whether they're new technology or the use of data diagnostics, I actually think they're endless. And I don't want to start reeling off all of my ideas because they're my ideas, but if people start getting into this space, and I really encourage a lot of people to, especially if you're already in the fire protection safety industry, you should be thinking about how this can change the world, change communities. Not all of it will, but what can you be doing to create a better outcome? And a building or a community that has implemented some of these features is always a safer community than one that doesn't.
And just jumping on this recommendation, what would you recommend for someone who wants to know more about this field? How they can learn more?
I think they'll need to get involved in some of the data or software data industry, which would be they could undertake some of the free seminars offered by AWS or Google as an example to start to understand data and data connectors. But also, if you were coming in from outside but didn't have any understanding of fire safety, you'd also have to get an appreciation of what fire safety is and what fire protection systems are and so on. So it's probably complex. It would probably be people who are already in the industry, either from the side of data scientists or network type engineers to electronics engineers, and then crossing over into fire safety or vice versa.
Thank you so much, Nathan. If you want to learn more about Nathan, links will be provided in the show notes, and the Smart Cities Council website can inform you even more. What have you learned from this interview? What questions do you have after listening to Nathan? What would you like to know more about? Let us know on the Smart Cities Council's website or on LinkedIn. Look out for other episodes with the global thought leaders or topical discussions. And thanks for tuning in.